Just put my jacket on.
Good evening, ladies and gents, wherever you may be around the world, and welcome to this special live stream on the late, great Jonathan Bowden. And I am very happy and honoured to have one of Jonathan Bowden's best friends and also a colleague, Eddy Butler, as our special guest this evening. Good evening, Mr. Butler.
Good evening.
I think just to start us off, maybe you could tell us how you first met Jonathan Bowden.
Well, I first met him it would have been in the beginning of '94, I think, possibly the end of '95. Sorry, '93. After I was in the BNP, and we'd won a by-election in Millwall in the East End. It's the first election win of any nationalist party for years and years and years. That caused a bit of a sensation. And another friend of mine called Mike Newlands, who was quite prominent in the BNP then, said, "Oh, I've got to meet this guy who is in the Tory right. Do you want to meet him and have a drink and a bit of a chat with him?" And I said, "Yeah, all right," because I was always in favour of trying to breach the gap between organised nationalism and the Tory right. There was a right wing of the Tory party in those days on the sort of Monday Club fringes, which doesn't exist at all now, but there was in those days. And I was always keen for there to be a bridging the gap between these two parts. So I went along, and we met in this restaurant in Kensington called De Keys, which is a Polish restaurant. It's quite a well-known Polish restaurant that was actually involved in a lot in the 60s and 50s spy scandals involving Philby and McLean and all that lot. It had this sort of raffish feel to it in those days. De Keys, it's quite a well-known place. We used to meet there, and we met there and had a Polish meal. It's a Polish restaurant, Polish meal and Polish wine, and got along very well immediately. And we met there quite frequently thereafter for about a year, and then he got a little bit involved in the BNP as well. And he didn't join then, but he attended a few meetings, and we collaborated in various other schemes from then on.
Cool. Like obviously we were talking before the stream, and my apologies to some people in the chat. We were a bit late, and that's my fault because I was engrossed in the conversation with Mr. Butler here. And as you just said, he was originally in the Monday Club, yeah, and I think before that in some other right-wing conservative organisation, I seem to recall.
Yeah, I've got. He did this thing. I've got a few things to show you. He did this magazine called. What have we got here? Can I show it on there? The Revolutionary Conservative, which he did with another guy called Stuart Milson, who I used to know. He used to be in the BNP in the 80s. I know Stuart Milson as well. He was his close collaborator then. Revolutionary Conservative. It was a sort of attempt. The Revolutionary Conservative was a contradiction in terms, isn't it? And it was a bit posy, frankly. If you read these I'll get the camera there. These journals they produced, they're a bit posy, but they're a conscious attempt to form a new right in England. There have been several attempts to do this on the lines of the French Nouvelle Droite, Grèce, and that's right. So that's what he's trying to do with Stuart Milson, and yeah, he's got an Armstrong, Wyndham Lewis here. What else have we got? It's that sort of thing. It's an attempt to form a new right in England, Revolutionary Conservative. So that's what he did. He used to do quite a lot of writing in those days as well. There's another book I've got here. You can see that, called Demon, which is vaguely about about Sir Jack the Ripper in the East End. He lived in the East End briefly before I knew him, and that's a book about East End criminality, really. But if you were to read that book, it's just like him talking. He switches from subject to subject. Jonathan Bowden, notoriously, when he spoke, he'd speak and say, I'd go to a meeting with him and say, look, he's a very good speaker, as people probably know. And he'd go to a meeting, and I'd be driving there with him, and I'd say, it's very important that we get across this message at this meeting. We've got to talk about elections, for example. I was like the elections officer running the election campaign. So we've got to really get it into people's minds about this year's elections. We want to do this or this about it. We want to make sure people come away from the meeting with that message in their head. Mm-hmm. So I'd give a boring speech about the nitty-gritty of elections, then he'd come on and he'd say, yes, we're going to speak about elections. I remember this is just an example how he'd speak. I remember when Margaret Thatcher won the election in 1979, and then soon afterwards she fought the Falklands War against the Argentinians. And the Argentinians, there's lots of beef in Argentina, and beef sandwiches, Fray Bentos, corned beef. We used to eat that in the war. We fought D-Day. All the people who died on the beaches at D-Day, he'd go off in a total tangent. Every sentence would lead to another one. I mean, he's not saying a thing about elections here. And then I'll be sort of sitting there fuming, thinking, oh, God, he's totally distracting the audience. And he'd be going on and on, doing all sorts of historical allusions and connections, and the audience would be entranced with this speech, because he would do it all without notes. And then he'd end up saying, oh yes, and the Roman Senate, the Senate of the people of Rome. Originally the Roman Senate was elected, and yes, we want to fight the elections next week. and that would be the end of it. And then he'd go like this, the audience would all stand up, and he'd always end his speech by doing this, which automatically gets people to stand up and give him a standing ovation. They'd all stand up and cheer him, thinking what a great speech is. And I'd be thinking, Christ, the whole, what's the point? Because they wouldn't remember a single thing of what I said after that. And and I'd go in the car on the way back, and I'd say, God, Jonathan, that was bloody pathetic. He'd be very happy because they'd all been cheering him.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I was one of the things I noticed that he did was he was one person who drew a parallel between Enoch Powell and Joseph Chamberlain in the late 19th and early 20th century. And I'm kind of quite interested in that era. In fact, I'm going to be doing a stream fairly shortly about that era when Britain really didn't have any allies and simply relied on keeping a very large Royal Navy.
What you mean about 1900-ish, 1910?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. I'm very interested in that era. And one of the things that Jonathan Bowden did was he drew a parallel between Joseph Chamberlain in that era, who was trying to make the old Commonwealth of the British Empire, and for people in the chat, the old Commonwealth is obviously Britain, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and back in those days, South Africa. And he was trying to turn that into something real politically, rather than something that was basically based on feelings and having the same monarch. Obviously he failed, because in 1908, the Liberals won the election. That was the election when Winston Churchill crossed the floor to the Liberal Party because he supported free trade, and what Chamberlain wanted was imperial tariff preference, which would have given goods coming into Britain from Canada and Australia and so on much cheaper prices, and would have encouraged political links, obviously. Yep. And I was just interested on that, and I thought on that note I would play a little clip of Jonathan Bowden talking about Enoch Powell and so on, if that's okay.
Yep.
All right, we'll do that.
People are ready to tell us, this is not possible, that is not possible. I say, whatever the true interest of our country calls for is always possible.
One's life is a bullet that goes through screens. You hit the final screen and you're dead. What happens after? None of us know. In my philosophy, the energy that's in us goes out into everything which exists. I have no regrets. 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 Fire, energy, glory, and thinking. Thinking is the important thing. That for me is life. Being white isn't enough. Being English isn't enough. Being British isn't enough. Know what you are. To read about your own culture is a revolutionary act. Knowledge is power. Listen to high music. Go to the National Gallery. Look at what we've produced as a group. There would be a respect for the past glories of our civilization. I urge all white people in this era to look into the mirror and to ask themselves, what do you know about what you are? And if you don't know enough, put your hand on that mirror and move towards greater knowledge of what you can become. Greatness is in the mind and in the fist. The glory of our time is not behind us. We can be great again. But the first thing that we have to do is to say, I walk towards the tunnel and I'm on my own and I'm not afraid and I have no regrets.
Okay, there was quite a few images in that little video that I think were fairly strongly associated with Mr. Bowden. What did you think, Mr. Butler?
What, of the film? Yeah, well, it gave him a few sound bites. He wasn't the greatest fan of John Tyndall, who was on there, I noticed. There is a book, you mentioned some of those people there, and there's a book that he wrote a chapter in called, can you see that? Have you heard of that book, Standard Bearers?
No.
Okay, it's called Standard Bearers, British Roots, the New Right, by the Bloomsbury Forum, which is another group that I was in with Jonathan, founded with Jonathan and a few other people. And there's a chapter in there on Joseph Chamberlain.
Oh, cool. Excellent.
By Adrian Davis, who we were talking about before the thing started. Another chapter on Enoch Powell somewhere by Sam Swirling, who was someone who Jonathan had dealings with in the Monday Club period of his operation. Where's the one? And Jonathan did a chapter. Where's the one on there? Oh, there's a chapter on Powell in here. Now, Jonathan did a chapter on a guy called Bill Hopkins. Have you heard of Bill Hopkins?
Yes, yes.
He was a writer of the New Right, Angry Young Men in the 50s. And he wrote a book called The Leap, and Jonathan was very close with Bill Hopkins, and before I knew him, and was he ran around with him a lot in his early days, in Jonathan's early days. And
he, could I ask you, did Jonathan Bowden lose all faith in the Conservative Party eventually?
In the party, I'd say yes. See, that's another one of these misunderstandings I think about Jonathan. He was, his early career was all in the Conservative Party, and he never lost that sort of aspect of his political view, but not in terms of the party political side of the Conservative Party, but he was a sort of small c conservative in many ways. Yeah. a lot of people think he was much more hardline than that, but that's because, frankly, he played to the crowd sometimes, or very often when he gave speeches. And when he was in the BNP in the 2000s, if he gave a speech and gave a hardline reference, it would get bigger cheer, basically, from people who go, "Oh yes, this is what we want to hear." And he did play to that, which wasn't actually what he really thought when you actually.
I was actually watching an interview that he did with Greg Johnson not long before we started this stream, and Greg Johnson actually asked him, like, if there was a political movement in the past that he identified with, and Jonathan Bowden specifically said no, he did not specifically identify with any particular movement in the past. And I got the impression that what Greg Johnson wanted him to say was that he identified with fascism or National Socialism or something like that. And Bowden actually went out of his way to say no, none of them were really exactly what he wanted. So
no, he in the modern era, he identified actually, and he correctly identified the populist movements in Europe, like what was then the Front National, the Liga Nord. This is they're called different things now, but the Vlaams-Belang, the approach of these type groups in the late 90s and in the early 2000s. Those are the groups that he identified as the ones that we should be following, not their path, their approach, their solutions to the problems, rather than more hardline ones. He was realistic actually in that. Although when you actually spoke to him, when he was actually saying this is what these are the tactics that we should be adopting and approaching, but at the same time he would make much more hardline speeches because it would get him the plaudits that he liked, that he enjoyed.
I wonder. I mean, there's a whole question around this, which I'm going to ask, but I think it's probably a little bit too early in the chat to do it just now. About the direction that British nationalism is taking. I mean, obviously, for people who don't know you're a very, very long-standing British nationalist. Like you were doing British nationalism when I was a teenager and about to go into the army, for example, and hadn't hardly thought about politics. So, but yeah, so we'll get around to that. But I'd like to do a little bit more on Bowden himself, I think, before we get into those areas. I have come to the conclusion, and as I say, like over the last month, I've probably watched everything there is online about Bowden, pretty much. Have you
seen the film called England Expects?
Yes,
yeah,
yes.
Yeah. If
you're in that.
Yeah, well, I really wrote it and did it, but if you could post me a link to it, because I can't find it anywhere.
Oh, it's on my friend's channel, which is actually called Jonathan Bowden on YouTube.
Oh, is it? Okay. He had a cameo role in that.
He was reading from the book England Expects in it, wasn't he?
Was he? No, I don't think so. He read a poem from the school that Nelson went to, I believe. He did that, and he did a few sort of dramatic. I think he did a thing near St Paul's or Trafalgar Square, perhaps, I can't remember, where he was reading rather dramatically.
Yes.
And I think that was at the beginning. I can't remember what it was he was reading. I think it was possibly a poem or something. I can't remember. It's so long since I've seen it. I want to see it because I haven't seen it.
Yeah, I'll absolutely send you the link after the stream. But yeah, it's on a friend of mine's channel actually.
We also were halfway through making a film that was going to be called England's Story. I mean, there's quite a lot of footage of it with him in it, but it's never been put together. And it was sort of it was going to be about. It was going to be set in part of Essex, showing all the eras of English history from the Ice Age, the Celts, the Romans, the Saxons, the Normans, or the Vikings, the Normans, all the way up.
So do you have some of the footage for this?
No, I don't. The guy who did it, the guy who made England Expects, is a guy called Rod Gordon, and he also made an earlier film that I did called EastEnded, and the third one was going to be England's Story, but we filmed probably 2/3 of it, but we never didn't ever finish it, and he's probably got all the footage and the outtakes as well. He's probably still got, I imagine.
Well,
there's quite a lot of it. There's somebody a much bigger role in it than before.
There's somebody in the chat I know will be interested in that. So Richard Ford, please take note. But yeah, really interesting. It's a pity that film didn't get finished. I thought the Nelson film was actually very good.
Yeah, so do I.
It is. I'm very keen on like military and naval history, so obviously I found that very interesting.
Griffin's obviously in it, but Jeremy Paxman, I think it's Jeremy Paxman, because it was on the anniversary of the Battle of Trafalgar, and Jeremy Paxman did a film with the BBC's budget and all this sort of stuff.
Yeah,
and I don't think it's as good as that one.
No, it was a really, really good film. I've been to Norfolk, to that part of Norfolk, to see where Nelson was born and all this kind of stuff. So, and I've been on HMS Victory, and as I say, I told you before the stream, my son's actually serving in the Royal Navy, so I'm interested in that stuff. So,
we literally went up to Burnham Thorpe, stayed one night up there. All three at me. Jonathan didn't go up. I went up there separately with Jonathan. There was a little bit of footage in where he went to school. I think we possibly went to Norwich. I think. And then another day I went up with me, Rod, and Griffin went up there, and we all stayed in one room because Griffin's so tight. We all stayed in one room in a pub where they had room, and quickly ran around and filmed all the different sequences in one day and came back again. There wasn't a sound man or anything. It was just three of us sitting there. It was there wasn't a team of people making that film at all.
Was Jonathan Bowden an interesting guy in like everyday conversation?
Well, yeah, I regarded him as such because he was probably my closest friend for about a good 10 years or more. I associated with. We used to have long, lengthy conversations every week or several times a week, probably. I regarded him as a close friend and someone who's very, very good company and an interesting person to talk to.
He was extraordinarily well read, like really well read as far as I can work out. Because you can't really put that stuff on. You know, if you don't know that stuff, you don't know it. You know. Yeah,
well. I'll tell you something about that. We used to go. A group of us used to go to. One of the reasons why he's regarded highly in nationalist circles. This is going to sound a bit snobby, perhaps, but there's not a lot of intellectualism in British far right circles or hardline right wing circles. And if someone's got a bit of knowledge and they can name drop things. People aren't going to probe beyond that because most people won't know. Well, they've vaguely heard the person using to name drop, but won't know anything else to ask anything else about it. So you can probably get away with things if you're not that well read, but there's a bit of pretense going on, sort of thing. And anyway, a group of us used to go to Hay-on-Wye, which is for those who don't know, Hay-on-Wye is a small town on the English-Welsh border, actually, I think it's in Monmouthshire. And it's a town given over to second-hand books. There's hundreds of second-hand bookshops there. It's what the town specialises in. And any book you want to get that's out of print, you can go to Hay-on-Wye, you probably better find it. And a group of us this is pre sort of online. Nowadays you can get them online, can't you? But then there's no such thing as that. So a group of us, this is the late 90s probably. Would have been the late 90s, very early 2000s. A group of us used to go there every year, a group of nationalists, and have a meal. We'd all stay in B&Bs, have a meal, and buy books, and go in the pub as well, obviously. And Jonathan used to obviously go, and he used to take a whacking great big like army kit bag, and empty when he went, and he'd at Hay and Wide, they'd have the cheap books. They're left outdoors, almost in racks outside, and so they're all a bit damp because they're outside virtually all year round, and they're like 10p or 5p. And I'd go with a list of like 10 books perhaps that I particularly wanted, and I'd find them in a day, or perhaps a day and a half. I'd find them all, and then a couple I'd feel we'd spend more of the time in the pub because I'd have the books that I wanted. I may book by 2 or 3 others that I've just noticed that I didn't particularly want originally, but they look interesting, and that's what I'd get. I wouldn't, but Jonathan would fill this kit bag, a very 200 weight of books, probably quite indiscriminate. It'd be, oh, that one, that one, that one, that one, and it would be a huge selection of books on a very wide range of subjects as well. And I'm convinced he only read the dust cover jacket on 90% of them, so he could he could bluff his way through on a little bit about these subjects, you know. But some subjects he did know a lot about, but he used to buy such a huge quantity of books. It was slightly ludicrous. He'd sit there, and they'd all be the 10p, 10 or 5p ones, the sort of soggy penguin paperbacks.
Well, I will say this, Mr. Butler, that like when I don't do it now because like I'm an old bugger, as I said to you earlier. But when I was younger, I probably read 8 books a week, nearly every week. I find it difficult to read now. I used to do that as well when I was young. I think as you get older, I don't know whether it's age or whether it's because people are fidgeting on their phones now, reading stuff on their phones. But I certainly find it difficult to read 1 book a month now. Yeah, I wouldn't say I read 1 a month, but I certainly don't read more than 1 every couple of weeks these days. Like I'm in the middle of a book on the Peninsular War at the moment. I just the things I know about that Jonathan Bowden has spoken about, and they're by no means all of them, but the things I know about that he's spoken about, he was pretty accurate.
Yeah. Well, if he's going to give a talk on something, he'd probably choose to do something he knows what he's talking about. But he would give the impression that he's got a much more eclectic knowledge than he actually had. And you could, if it was a subject which I knew about, and he'd start talking, you'd catch him out quite quickly. But that's just the nature of the guy. But they'll just tell you a quick funny story. This is the sort of nature of Jonathan Bowden as well. But when we went to Hay and Wide one year, because I'd pick him up going through, because I live in London, I'd pick him up, we live near Reading, so I'd pick him up, and I'd only decided to go rather late, and so the B&B that everyone was staying in was full, and I was going to stay in another one just down the road. And on the way there, someone rang. Mobile phones were around, but they weren't smartphones. So someone rang and said, "Oh, one of the people wasn't going to come." So there was room in the B&B where everyone else was going to be, after all. So I said, "Right, okay, I'll cancel one I'm going to, and I would all say it's more convivial. We'll all stay together." So I said to Jonathan, "Oh, could you ring the B&B that I'm staying in, just apologise, say that I've been called away for work or something, you know, just to upset them, just I'm called away for work, unfortunately won't be able to come." And so he gets his phone out, he rings up and says, "Oh, hello, I'm ringing up on behalf of Eddy Butler. He's booking into your B&B later, but he won't be coming." They all said, "Oh, why not?" And he goes, "He's found a better place." Cringing. They sent me a letter afterwards saying, "Someone rang on your behalf and said they'd found a better place, but how could you possibly know? Because our place is very nice and everyone likes our place." That is actually typical Jonathan. He loved to get you into embarrassing situation. That's the sort of guy he was.
A bit of a shit stirrer, as we used to say.
Yeah. But also he knows I had a low social embarrassment threshold, and I'm easily embarrassed by people acting in a in a way around me where there's people looking. Oh, but he didn't have a low social embarrassment threshold at all, and he would like to put me in a position that would make me feel uncomfortable. He said that was part of our relationship, if you like, was that he liked to do that to put me make me feel awkward, you know.
Yeah, he was definitely a performer. I mean, a very talented performer. Have you seen the film that he did about, not the speech, but the film that he did based on the Punch and Judy stuff?
Is that the film where he's wearing some sort of mask?
I think so, yeah, part of it. And he's making strange noises and doing all sorts of stuff.
Yeah, it's a sort of arty-farty sort of
very much
avant-garde thing, isn't it? But yeah, I don't think it was very impressive, to be honest. But,
I just thought, my God, this guy is like, he's a full-on actor, you know, when I watched it.
Yeah. Well, there is so when I was talking to you earlier, I think I gave you an example of one of his. Did I give you I gave you an example of one of his speeches, didn't I? And was that before that we went live or not?
I think it was before, actually. Yeah.
Okay, but he would do a speech where it would be a stream of consciousness, interconnected, and not relevant to what the subject matter should really be about. But everyone would love it because it would be impromptu, no notes, delivered powerfully, and all that sort of stuff. But if anyone asked what was the real message behind that speech afterwards, you wouldn't really know. But it was just the impression of the whole thing. And I would castigate him for this. When we'd go to these meetings together nearly always, and I'd say, you know, you were supposed to get across this and this point, and you didn't really address any of those points. You were just giving an entertaining speech for the masses. And he'd say, "You think I'm a clown, don't you? You think I'm a performing clown?" And there was an element to him that he was. Yeah, it sounds a bit cruel, doesn't it? But there's an element to him that he was a bit like that. He was a performer rather than someone who would stick strictly to a topic that he needed to really address, that the audience needed to be indoctrinated with, if you want a better word.
When was Jonathan Bowden heavily attracted to the BNP when he joined it, or did he follow you into it, or did you follow him, or what?
Well, what happened was when I met him, we set up a thing called the Bloomsbury Forum. Not just me and him, but a few other people, Adrian Davis, a few other people, and the Bloomsbury Forum, which published that book, was set up to bridge the gap between the right wing of the Tory party and overt nationalism, as I mentioned earlier. That was something I particularly believe needed to be done, because overt nationalism was effectively lobotomized, because the more intelligent people were all in the Tory thing, the Tory side, because they didn't want to damage their potential careers by being in a toxic organisation as the NF or the BNP were in those days, and are today as well. So it was career suicide. So the more intelligent people who potentially had a good career didn't want to touch it. So I wanted to bridge that gap and solve that problem, because if all the most intelligent people won't be in your party, then it somewhat limits your party's potential to grow and develop. So that was the aim of the Bloomsbury Forum. And then in Nick Griffin took over the BNP in '99, and he made overtures to us to get involved. He said he was going to create a new sort of lead it in a different direction, or populist direction, like the European parties that I mentioned earlier. And we all got back involved. I got back involved. He put his feet in the water with the BNP. He didn't join then, but almost immediately Griffin was involved in big shenanigans over finances, corruption, as he always did. And there was a big bust up. He sacked his treasurer, who was that guy I mentioned earlier, Mike Newlands, and his deputy chairman, a woman called Sharon Edwards, and and there was a big bust up. we were sort of involved in it because we were trying to get back involved, and it totally shown himself to be no different from how we believed him to be before, which was in the 80s. I knew him in the 80s. Other people knew him in the 80s, Griffin. And so we actually went off and formed this thing called the Freedom Party, which I think
Yes.
And we tried to form a party that was on the lines of these European type populist parties. Without going into great detail of why and how it happened, the BNP made a breakthrough then a couple of years later in Burnley, and got a number of people elected. And Griffin was using exactly the sort of language which I'd said he should have used popularly. And actually, one of these Hay on Wye trips, I was sitting there, and someone else who I won't mention who it was, but a well-known-ish person, said, "What am I, me, doing sitting here griping about Griffin and refusing to get back involved when I should just swallow my pride and get back involved because they're actually doing something. They're actually getting people elected." So I sort of thought about, really, I should, and so I did. And so I got back involved, and I sort of let my colleagues down in the Freedom Party by doing that, including Jonathan. And got involved with the BNP, got someone elected pretty much straight away in London, or in Hertfordshire, actually, on the outskirts of London. And Jonathan had been in touch with me all this time, and he said, "Oh, I think I should join as well." So he then came in and joined the BNP as well. And this was in 2003, that would have been. And I prevailed upon Griffin to Griffin had a thing called the I think it's called the Advisory Council. I can't remember what it was called. It was like his body within the party who supposedly advised him on things. And I prevailed upon him to make. I was National Elections Officer by then. Griffin appointed me that virtually straight away, and I got Griffin to appoint Jonathan the cultural officer. So he was, because he's got sort of weight, intellectual weight, it lent more credibility to the party by having someone like Jonathan as the cultural minister of, can't remember the exact title, but it's something like Minister of Culture or something like that. I used to joke that he was like the, the Barry Humphries character, Dame Edna Everage. Do you know Dame Edna Everage?
Yes, I know who you're talking
He's got
about.
this other character, Barry Humphries, isn't it?
Yeah.
He's got that, I don't know if he's alive or dead now, but he's got the other character called Sir Des Patterson, I think his name was.
Yes.
The Australian Cultural Affairs attaché.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. All of these wrestling in mud.
I think Jonathan that he was like the Cultural Affairs attaché, but he was he was appointed like the cultural officer on the advisory council, so had a position on there, and he could go around meetings and give speeches as the cultural officer of the party, and it gave the party more weight. Although Griffin didn't like it because he was a better speaker than Griffin, and he still saw him as a rival.
Really? Okay. Yeah. All right. On that note, I've got another little clip that I'm going to play of Jonathan Bowden talking about going around, because he used to go to some pretty rough pubs and stuff to give speeches, didn't he?
Yeah.
And I've got a little clip that I'm going to play, which is Jonathan Bowden talking about that experience. So I'm just going to do that.
I remember at some Essex meetings, some bikers meeting, they're almost chanting in them, I sometimes think, my father's a very sort of posh bank manager, and I'm here in this meeting. I've spoken in some utter dens, and pits. I've spoken in one place in Burnley with barbed wire all over the meeting. And I said to the organiser, "Why is there so much barbed wire over the meeting place?" And he said, "It's the kids." Come on, John. But he didn't tell me which part of the population he was referring to. Shutters on the windows, you know, and there was one sheeping place in South London, Merton or something I spoke at. Good Lord, it was sort of, yeah, he's right, some bloke would get up and say, you know what I mean? And the other bloke would say, I don't agree with that, mate. I think you need sorting out. And they'd almost be fighting in the middle of the meeting. The organiser would go down and sort of kick them like a dog. He dragged one bloke out, hitched him up. You better turn this off. Hitched him up and threw him out the meeting saying, get out. You're getting out, boy. It's a beer cellar, it's sort of semi-uncontrollable. And yet you do have a power over them. They listen to you. It's interesting because, there's a few heavies there like Steve and so on, but there's a sort of this, but they have a sort of admiration for you in a way because they want you to say what they can't. That's what it boils down to. Yes, and they admire you for it as well because there's also a class love-hate relationship as well, because they sort of the part of them doesn't like you and a part of them adores you, and it sort of the one vies with the other, But then patriotism's the only socialism, really, because it holds people together in their difference, because people are different. I says a bloke.
I think there was a little bit of exaggeration going on.
Yeah, he was. Quite a lot of that was he's making it sound a lot worse than it was, I don't doubt. But he actually had there's a lot of truth in what he says, which is something we discuss a lot, which is that the British working class have always craved a toff to come along and lead them. That's what they've always wanted. Jonathan wasn't actually a toff at all. His background was rather humble, but yet he spoke and sounded like a toff, but he wasn't at all in his social upbringing.
He went to I believe he went to a Catholic grammar school, did he?
Yeah, in Reading.
Yeah.
And he was from a village in Oxfordshire. Some of my family are from the Henley area, and so I know the same villages where Jonathan was brought up. And there's one where I had a drink with him there once, and I said, "Oh, should we go to Peppard?" There's this place called Peppard, and he goes, "Peppered." His yokel accent would come out every so often because his natural accent from this sort of rural, poor background. He's trying to make out in that clip his dad's a posh bank manager. This is part of his fantasy. But his background was rural, poor in South Oxfordshire, where the people speak with what you would call a yokel accent.
Yeah, I know that area really well, actually, around Marlow and Henley-on-Thames and that area. I know it really well. Yeah.
Yeah, and Peppard, and so he would every so often, at an unguarded moment, this sort of yokel accent would creep out because he affected this posh, plummy voice, which people, as he said in that little clip, people sort of respect the British working class, respect it. On the one hand, they sort of say, "Oh, tough, poncy, bloody snobs," but then if a posh person comes in and starts talking the talk, they doff their cap. "Oh yeah, you're the bloke," That's just the nature.
I was born in Bermondsey in inner South London, like on the south side of Tower Bridge, and so my younger brother was a Millwall supporter, so I know those kind of areas, and that's why I knew he was exaggerating a little bit about the pubs, because it could get rough in a pub, but by and large, people were pretty civilized for the most part.
And to Jonathan, people are tough, like people mostly, not all. I could talk later or anytime you want to about exceptions to this, but most people are very deferential towards him, and the fact that he was a toffee-nosed, or seemingly a toffee-nosed, well-educated, seemingly Oxbridge. He wasn't from Oxbridge, but seemingly, people like that. The meeting, I never went to it. I wasn't at the meeting in Burton, for example, but I know the venue, and I know the sorts of people he's talking about at that meeting. They were sort of scaffolders and people like that. They were very rough and ready, but good types.
Yep.
And so it was a fairly rough atmosphere very often at these places. But he was not like he was ever personally in any sort of danger at all, actually. Well, one strange thing about Jonathan, he always used to wear steel-toe boots.
Really?
Yeah, he'd wear a suit and these sort of clonking steel-toe. You look down, he'd have this pair of steel-toe cap boots, which I think he wanted to, in case he had to kick his way out of trouble or something.
Insurance. I don't know. You make him sound like more fun, perhaps, than his persona online tends to be these days.
Yeah, he was. Yeah. Well, yes, he was I saw him as a fun person who I'd have a laugh with, Yeah. But as I think I said to you before we came live, most people only knew him when he was putting on a persona for their benefit at meetings and putting on a presence for them, which wasn't really him. Most people's stage presence isn't the same as their real presence, is it? So, yeah.
I find it extraordinary, though, that he could go to these working class pubs and talk about quite obscure figures sometimes at like considerable depth. And these guys actually seemed interested. And you never hear any barracking or people being bored or talking in the background or that kind of stuff.
Well, he would the tone of his voice, he projected very well. He spoke, they probably just listened to the rise and fall of his voice more than anything else. And he would use the techniques of, when you're supposed to say things 3 times and the third time with an effect, and that gets people. He would employ that regularly through the speech. And he was quite adroit enough to tell if the audience was nodding off, he'd know to suddenly fire it up. So he was quite receptive and to what was going on in front of him. He didn't just talk like some speakers. JT, for example, John Tyndall.
Yep.
He could talk and have something planned that he wanted to talk and couldn't deviate from what he had already planned, and could lose an audience. I've seen JT lose an audience several times because he wasn't flexible enough to change tack. Whereas Jonathan wouldn't really do that because he'd be watching the response to everything he was saying on it. He fed off the responses that he got from the audience very effectively, and so I don't think Jonathan would ever have lost an audience.
Yeah, he seemed to be able to do these marvelous speeches with no notes.
Yes, I don't think I've ever known Jonathan to do a speech with notes.
Did he not even do bullet points or anything of that nature?
No, not that I ever knew. JT did, for example. He always had notes.
Yep.
But Jonathan, I don't recall ever using notes.
One thing I think you can probably definitely say about Jonathan Bowden is that he was probably the last great British orator in terms of like the great speech makers of history, because I don't think anyone since then has come close to him.
What, in all political parties? I don't know necessarily about that, but he was a good orator.
Yeah, I mean, he was absolutely up there with people like from the 19th century, even, where speech making was an art. Yes,
I'm not really sure that. I don't want to sound pouring cold water on this, but as I said, he wasn't a disciplined speaker. Very rarely was he a disciplined speaker. It would sound intelligent, But if you actually said, this is what I want you to say, these are the points you've got to get across, he wouldn't really do that very often. He would stray widely in the course of his talk, nearly always. And I don't know whether Gladstone, for example, would have done that. I suspect he wouldn't.
Yeah, you're probably correct. But I mean, like someone like Churchill, for example, who was supposedly he like dictated his speeches before he did them, so like he knew exactly.
I don't know if Churchill spoke up without notes, did he?
No, I don't think so. Not as far as I know. But he's regarded as a great orator. Like I'm a bit ambivalent about Churchill, to be honest, because I think his military and naval strategic judgments were not always particularly good. But that's my only issue with it. Well, and also I think his crossing the floor to the Liberal Party in 1908 was a disaster for Britain. But I mean, there's also that. Yeah, I definitely think that in terms of public speaking, there was an element of genius about Jonathan Bowden in terms of public speaking.
Yeah, he certainly, in nationalist terms, in the area of politics that he's interested, he was certainly the best speaker there's been, certainly in the last 30 years, I'd say, anyway.
Mm-hmm. Who would you say was better than that before that?
Martin, do you know of Martin Webster?
I've heard of him, yeah.
Okay, Martin Webster in his prime was very good.
Mm-hmm.
Very good. That might be an unfashionable thing to say for people who know who Martin Webster was. Yeah, before that, in the 70s, that would have been Webster.
Mm-hmm.
He's the only one that I've heard myself who would rival Jonathan.
We've got someone in the chat saying Enoch Powell, which brings me on to a question I wanted to ask you. Did you or Jonathan Bowden ever actually meet Enoch Powell?
I didn't. In the time when I can't remember when Enoch Powell died now, but when he was politically active, when I joined the National Front in 1980, so I wouldn't have been going around wanting to speak to Enoch Powell because he was sort of regarded as a reactionary, a bit of a fuddy-duddy reactionary, really, by us in the 80s, and so I wouldn't have really sort of gone around wanting to sort of suck up to him. And then by the time I got a bit older and more mellow on such subjects, I think Enoch Powell was a bit too old and out to seed by then.
Yeah,
and he was also in Northern Ireland. Jonathan, did he meet? I don't know if he put him. If he met him, it would have been. If he met him, it would have been like, "Hello, Mr. Powell." It wouldn't have been any sort of meeting of minds or anything.
Yeah, I think somewhere or other I've seen Jonathan Bowden say he met him, but quite briefly.
Yeah. I've certainly never seen a photograph, and look, if he met him, it would have been at a function, and he would have shaken his hand, or just seen him at a function, at a Tory function or something, a fringe meeting or something. But there was no proper meeting between them, put it that way.
Mm-hmm. All right, moving on a little bit.
Enoch Powell, going back to what I don't know, I can't see the chat, but I don't think Enoch Powell was a great orator. Really, he was I don't think he sort of set the blood running with his speeches.
No, I kind of agree with you, actually.
I don't think he got people up cheering and shouting when he gave a speech. That wasn't the type of speech he gave. But
yeah. I think what I would say is I think Enoch Powell was probably the last chance to save the Conservative Party. But obviously they passed up on it. Like my father, for example, and as I say, I was in the South London. My father was a huge supporter of Enoch Powell, so but obviously they passed him up and they elected the probably yeah, the probably pedophile yachtsman instead, and that was the end of them, as far as I'm concerned, to be honest with you. Someone in the chat is asking what your opinion of Joe Owens is, or if you knew him.
Joe Owens from Liverpool.
Yeah.
Well, I know him, or I knew him. I haven't seen him for years. Not exactly much to do with Jonathan Bowden, but I used to be on friendly terms with him years ago.
Mm-hmm.
I believe he slagged me off on one of his films at some point. He slagged virtually everybody off at some point. So, yeah, I used to get on quite well with him. He was around in the late 80s in Liverpool, so I knew him from then. And knew him off and on. I hadn't probably seen him for 15 years, probably.
Wow. All right, I'm going to move on to a few questions that some of my friends have asked. Like, I've got a little Discord, which is basically just for streaming and so on. And some of my friends in the Discord have asked a few questions, if you don't mind me asking those. Where are we? First one. Forgive the dead air here, guys. I'm just trying to find this first question. Okay, I'm going to move on to these. This one's too difficult to find. Yeah, okay, here we go. I've already asked the first one of these, which is how Bowden got involved with the BNP. What were Jonathan Bowden's thoughts on the BNP collapse, Mr. Butler?
Okay, well, I'll start at the beginning on this. He left the BNP in, I think, say 2008. I'm going slightly on memory here, because, as I said, Griffin saw him as a rival because he was popular, and he'd go to meetings, give a good speech all around the country, and people would whisper, or they got to Jonathan after and say, "You should be the leader. You should be the leader." And obviously, this got back to Griffin, and Griffin didn't like it. And he had this group of people on a low-grade blog type site, who the real Griffin liked to associate with the very worst elements in nationalism, real scum types. And there was this low-grade scummy type group who had this blog that someone told me about, that they put a story up saying, at Griffin's behest, saying that Jonathan was a pedo or something like that, a nonce or a pedo, something like that. And so I looked it up and saw it, and I rang Jonathan next time I was speaking to him. I said, "Oh, by the way, Jonathan, there's this site that's gone up saying you're a nonce and a pedo, and Griffin's got these people who went under a particular name. They're flagging you off. It's clearly at Griffin's behest, and they're calling you this, that, and the other." And I thought that he'd just say, "Oh, what a bunch of tossers," or something like that. Griffin's a prick, or something like that. But he didn't. He actually had a bit of an attack of the vapors and a bit of a sort of mental collapse, and resigned. And he said, virtually within seconds of me telling him this on the phone, he said, "Oh, I've got to resign. I've got to resign. I'm resigning." I thought, what the bloody hell? And because he didn't have, as I said to you when I was talking to you off air, although he spoke about the Superman and that was his ideal,
the Nietzschean stuff,
Nietzschean Superman, he didn't actually live up to that himself. I didn't hold it against him that he at all personally that he didn't live up to it himself, because that wasn't his role in politics or in life.
As you said, Nietzsche himself didn't live up to that. So.
And so, but I was slightly shocked that he'd collapsed so readily, just a bit of verbal from these tossers, really. And he resigned, he left, he wouldn't go to anything or do anything. He was just edging back into it to do. He started making a few more appearances after about a year of absence, and I was trying to persuade him back and get back involved and all this sort of stuff. He was no longer cultural affairs officer because he'd resigned. So I said, okay, we don't bother about doing that. Just come back and speak at a few meetings and get back involved. The party's bigger than Griffin, this sort of thing, you know. And then, so he was very anti-Griffin, but because of this, because Griffin had, it was clearly Griffin's behest this attack had been made upon him.
Bastard.
And but he was inching his way back in when in 2010 there was a huge bust up which led to the whole folding up of the BNP, which was it was the catalyst for it was Mark Collett, who you probably obviously know of.
Yes.
Got involved in a threats to kill thing with threatening to kill John. What's his name? Bloody Dowson and Jim Dowson. Have you heard of him? Jim Dowson. He was he's sort of now running around with Griffin now, and Griffin allegedly. And I was very close friends then of Mark Collett, a very close collaborator, it appears. And I was roped into it because Collett basically named me as his ally and brought the whole thing. Mark Collett brought the whole thing crashing down around us, and various other people were mentioned, and there was sacks and so forth. And it led to a great big schism between me and Griffin. And Bowden sort of supported me, but because he was very worried about being personally implicated in this, because I mentioned this group that attacked Jonathan a couple of years before, and they obviously were used by Griffin to attack me a lot. And they had about 3 or 4 blogs attacking me and making stuff up or elaborating rumours about me. And so the internet was filled with Griffin was a master at filling the airwaves with scandal and bad stories about you. I was supposed to have done this, done that, done the other, being a real rotter of the worst order. Didn't really bother, all this sort of thing doesn't really bother me, but Jonathan was very worried about getting implicated in this, so he stayed very much in the background, didn't want to get involved, although he did make a statement supporting me in this schism. And but he was very anti-Griffin, and so but he sort of kept his distance a bit and didn't want to get too much involved. And then about a year and a half later, he had a breakdown, which led eventually a more mental breakdown, really, that led to his death.
Yeah, we spoke about this before we came on air, and I asked you then, I'll ask you now. Do you think that contributed to Jonathan Bowden's early death? I'm not saying it caused it, but contributed towards it.
It contributed, I think. It did contribute it. The circumstances were he'd been to America maybe at least once before, several years before, and he'd done a series of talks there.
Apparently very successful from what I hear.
Yeah, and very really impressed them. He was the sort of person that an educated American nationalist would, in their imagination, see as an intelligent Englishman. That's how he came across them. So he could talk about Shakespeare, Dickens, all these sort of cultural footnotes he could make. And he went down very well, very well. They almost sort of, when can we possibly have Jonathan back? We must have him back. And he was invited back. And there was stories that the meetings in America were going to be disrupted by whatever they're called in America, Antifa, whatever their groups called.
Yeah.
The
Lefty scum.
Yeah. And Jonathan was of a nervous disposition. He I told you he went around with
Still talking about boots.
And, he wasn't a brawler. He wasn't someone to get involved in fisticuffs and stuff like that.
Yeah, no, he doesn't strike me as that sort of guy at all. No.
He wasn't that. That wasn't him. And he was a little bit nervous of that sort of thing. And on the something like the day before he was going to get the flight, he had a complete breakdown. And the flight to America, he had a complete breakdown. He was literally he was put in someone's house, quite one person's house in West London.
Mm-hmm.
And another guy was coming in, another quite one guy was coming into the house. He's told me what happened. And Jonathan was standing behind the door with a great big machete, thinking that he was thinking people were after him all the time. And he almost like stabbed this guy to death as he came to the door, sort of thing. And he was like a cat on a hot tin roof. And he went back to Reading and was arrested. I'm told he was arrested walking around naked in Reading with a great big meat cleaver of some sort.
Wow.
And was basically sectioned. And thought he was hearing voices. I spoke to him on the phone several times, and he was in this establishment of some sort. He's hear voices, people telling him stuff, were watching him from the bushes over the road. Then I'd say, there's no one over the road, there's no one telling you, no, that's right, there's no one there at all. And then he'd say, yes, there's one watching you over the road. And he developed a sort of total paranoia, persecution paranoia. The last time I saw him, I went and met him and took him out, and they allowed him, after a while, they allowed him out on like day release type thing. And we took him out for me and there was someone called Sharon Ebanks. I don't know if you she was from Birmingham. And he had she came across to me when I was in the BNP as a very rough and ready, sort of brummy woman with tattoos and quite severe. But I got to know her, and she's actually a very intelligent person. Then I understood, and Jonathan was very close to her, and I understood why he was, because she was actually very, very intelligent and well read and quite intellectual. In fact, appearances were deceptive, sort of thing.
Yeah.
And anyway, we took him out for a meal in a pub in Sonning. Do you know Sonning?
Yes. Yes.
It's quite near Peppard, actually.
Yeah.
And on the river, but Sonning's halfway between Reading and Henley. Very nice.
Pretty part of the world.
Yeah, very picturesque. We went to a nice pub there, took him out for a meal, had a look around the churchyard. He was totally normal, a bit subdued, but totally normal, because I think he was on drugs which repressed his paranoia, probably, but also repressed his more fiery temperament. And so he was on a sort of level keel rather than more. Usually he was quite up and down in his nature. And we dropped him back after several hours. We dropped him back, and I sort of wistfully saw him waving us, "Oh, do you have to leave me?" sort of thing from the steps of this secure accommodation. That's actually the last time I ever saw him. And yeah, and he was released into some sort of properly sheltered accommodation where he could come and go as he pleased for about 6 months, and died of I think a heart attack due to the medication he was on, I suspect. And he made a few speeches during that period where he's somewhat monotone. He's not as fiery as he was. It was a different person, because I think
some of them are still quite good, though, as we were saying before the stream.
Yes, if you watch a before and after speech. One of the things I saw, one of the speeches on YouTube, and he's talking. He's doing this all the way through it. It's like it's very. When I watch it, I think, God, what's happening there? And he was just doing that the whole way through. He was talking quite intelligently, but in a slight monotone. But his arms are doing that the whole way through. He spoke somewhat in a monotone afterwards, but probably more. Slightly more intelligently, because it was less. His performance was less theatrical, and he was putting less into the performance and more probably into thinking what he was actually saying. And I think I said to you there's some tapes of him talking to that American Spencer guy. I can't remember what his first name is. Is it Robert Spencer?
Richard Spencer, yeah.
Richard Spencer. And where they're actually quite intelligent talks. And I'm 90% sure they were done after his collapse, and in that short period between his collapse.
Yeah, it was about 2011 he was doing that stuff, I think, wasn't it?
Yeah, that would be about right, probably. And and he was a bit of a burnt, empty husk sort of thing at that period. When I see the films of him, it's a bit shocking, actually, that particularly this one where he's doing this the whole way through it. You can sort of see he's a damaged creature,
Yeah, that must have been really sad for a good friend like Jonathan Bowden was to yourself.
I think back to your original point, I think there's a degree to which that incident with Griffin's sort of persecution of him pushed him towards his death. But probably if it hadn't been that, it would have been something else, so
maybe I've got another little clip I'm going to play now, which actually relates to what we're talking about, and then I've got like about 6 or 7 questions that people have asked me to ask you, if that's okay. So I'm going to play this little clip, and then we'll have a few questions. If anyone in the chat has some sensible and polite questions, I will absolutely address them to Mr. Butler as well.
Which you do not form immediately now. You form a party over time in the next 6 months to the next year, and you work to do so from here on in. You take the party from Nick Griffin from the inside out now and in the next year. The present leader is a wily fox. He's associated with everyone who dress up in uniform through to members of UKIP. He's adopted every political position that it's possible to adopt in this spectrum of opinion. Enormous amounts of money have gone through that organisation, particularly in the last 2 to 4 years. But all of that is history. And as we look around this society now, the people need an alternative to the liberal consensus. Nobody wants to vote Labour deep down anymore. No one wants to vote Tory deep down anymore. No one wants to vote Liberal Democrat deep down anymore. But they will not vote for his party under its present aspect. What they might vote for is a cleaned up, new branded British National Party, which has a different identity and a different leadership. But there is one thing that's quite true of the last 13 years of the British National Party, and that is if you have a dictator, and that party has been run the way Libya has been run for 40 years, that party has been run under the present leader the way a third world country is run. They say they're opposed to third world immigration, but that party is run the way Burkina Faso is run. That is how that party is run. None of the people who've been the treasurer of that party were really the treasurer. The treasurer is someone else. Everyone knows that. To have a party that has a chance, you can't be whiter than white and purer than pure, but you've got to be clean. You've got to be reasonably clean. What did people think of Panorama? What did people think of leaving the room so you won't be spoken to? You only leave the room because the questions are unanswerable and you can't answer them. And you know that you can't answer them. But we're here to discuss the future and not the past, what will happen, and the left is delighted about what's going on. The left sees the whole spectrum from UKIP outwards breaking down into small fissiparous groups where everyone's in their own little sect and people don't talk to each other, and the present leader has brought things forwards and now contrived to ruin it all, and they're delighted. So the way to stop it being ruined is to reconstitute it all over time. You've got a jigsaw, and somebody's thrown the jigsaw on the ground and all the pieces are higgledy-piggledy and hell-male, and you've got to bring them back together again and reconstitute them and even turn them upright so that you can actually stitch them together again to make a coherent pattern or picture. That's what faces us. What can be done is the process of firstly getting the pieces together, then getting them up the right way, then knitting them back together. You won't do that in one afternoon in Leicestershire, but you may do that over about a year as you knit people together. You certainly need a nucleus of people to come together, and you cannot form a party through detestation of one political individual. It has to be got a much broader and wider extent than that. The reason why these little micro parties that have been formed hitherto won't go anywhere is they are largely the gasping last gesture of people who've been thrown out of that organisation by the present incumbent and his clique. What you need is to bring together everybody that can be brought together into a network or a confederation of people who will go forward from today so to do. So you've got to form something out from today's meeting. Otherwise, it will be just another talking shop in the Midlands. What I propose is that a national federation is formed of like-minded people inside and outside the British National Party who may well move to form a political party in the next year. That gives people the chance to reconstitute the party civically and socially prior to possibly forming a new one a year from now, so that the present leadership knows that they're living on borrowed time and that they basically only have really 6 months to a year to prove that they're different to what everyone now thinks that they are, or to step aside, which is unlikely and impossible, or to be driven through bankruptcy and criminality into penury and ruin, or to be taken over by new forces. Politics is about vitality and politics is about energy. There's no energy in that party anymore, and no one will do anything for the present incumbent and his leadership. The energy's here. The energy's here in this room. See, it's not wasted.
Mr. Bowler, do you remember him doing that speech?
I wasn't there. I know where it was. It was the it was in I think probably about 2011. After Andrew Bronze did his leadership challenge, there was a preliminary meeting to set up a new group, a rival party that eventually was called, I think, the British Freedom Party. I think that didn't get anywhere because they delayed too long in doing it. And if you actually listen to what Jonathan says, he was saying quite a lot of contradictory things there. He was saying, wait a year before setting a party, but the energy was in the room there. And if you wait, you lose all energy. It was quite a contradiction. It was delivered quite powerfully, but it was full of contradictory messages. He was saying we mustn't focus on the ills of one person, but the whole first part of this thing was saying how bad Griffin was, wasn't it? Which obviously might be true, but it was quite a contradict. It was a powerfully delivered speech, but quite a lot of contradictions in what he said. And he effectively said the effective message was actually charge forward and wait until next year. That's what he was sort of saying, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I got that. I presume that was after his breakdown that he made that speech, was it?
I think it was probably just before, actually.
Oh, okay.
I'm not 100% sure. I'd have to check when he.
I think it said 2011 is the only thing I noticed on the
Well,
clip.
it was around when Gaddafi died, wasn't it? Because he was making references to it. When did Gaddafi die? I'd have to look up when Gaddafi died, and I don't even know when he died himself.
Was that the kind of same period that you stopped being involved with the BNP?
Well, I stopped in 2010. He died in 2012. So he had his breakdown at the end of 2011. I think that was a bit before. This was probably just a shade before, I think.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, you probably don't want to know about this for the purpose of this thing, but I joined a thing called the English Democrats.
Yeah, I've heard of those guys. Yeah.
2011, and so that's why I didn't go to that meeting, because I didn't have any faith in that approach, basically. Jonathan West.
It's interesting that he was still trying to fight back then.
Yes, he really went because he liked an audience, and he liked to speak in front of an audience, and he was invited, so he went there to speak in front of the audience. I spoke to him when I spoke to him before the thing even. So he was saying that you need to realign with everyone who's interested, whereas that meeting was really about people who are sour about Griffin and the BNP. So he was effectively saying there needs to be a realignment of people, which is what we did when we were talking about the Bloomsbury Forum 15 years before. He was saying you needed a realignment of all the national forces in a new body that wasn't based on it being anti-Griffin. But because the audience was there very being anti-Griffin, a big chunk of his speech was being anti-Griffin, wasn't it? So yeah. But
I just thought it was interesting that, as you said, he had this kind of Jonathan Bowden had this kind of relatively fragile artistic psyche, but he was at least publicly fighting back in that speech, I suppose.
Yes, look, when I say that he had this, as you described, fragility. Look, when he was in the Freedom Party, the small group that we had before, he was going to initially be the chairman of it, and then didn't, because he had an attack of the vapors and went off in a great big sort of, I can't possibly do this, and sort of let people down. But then there's only a small number of us, and because that was his nature, he was a bit like that. That doesn't mean that he couldn't make a firebrand speech, and he made a number of firebrandish speeches. That's why he's quite popular. But
I'd say he's more than quite popular. I mean, I speak to American nationalists who I respect, and I don't respect all of them, which includes Richard Spencer, for example. But American nationalists who I respect, I really admire Jonathan Bowden.
Yes, well, if you look at his speeches and so forth, and you know him from them, they're quite a impressive body of work. So if you're judging him on that, if you're saying go from there and say he should be the leader of a party, so you say he was still alive, then you'd be on a sticky wicket straight away. I'll give you another example of how he was. This book, which I've mentioned to you before, which had chapters on different people, and he did a chapter on Bill Hopkins. And I was the editor of the book, and I had to put it together. And he was the last person to submit anything for it that was holding it up, publishing it. His bit on Bill Hopkins, and when he supplied the work to me, it was a tatty pieces of paper with scribble all over it that I had to completely rewrite to get it into a chapter, because he didn't have the discipline to sit down and write an article. He'd developed some sort of plot. He had managed to write these sort of books earlier, some years earlier, and articles in these magazine some years earlier, but by the late 90s, he virtually couldn't write, so he had no way of writing or supplying anything. So if you ever put him under any timetable to do anything, or you know, he wouldn't do it. He wouldn't just do it. But if you wanted him just to deliver a speech, a brouhaha speech, you would do it, and he would do it perfectly.
Yeah, he had a huge talent for that. Absolutely correct. I've got a few questions to ask you, Mr. Butler, if you don't mind. Let me just go and look at some of these. Now, where are we? Yeah, there is a good one from a good friend of mine. What do you think that Jonathan Bowden would make of the state of the dissident right today?
In Britain?
Yeah, principally.
He'd probably say it was a shambles.
And I mean, obviously, your own views on that would be interesting too. So, I mean, you
know. Well, it's a bit of a shambles. Yeah, it's a bit of a shambles. The whole COVID thing is making it complicating matters in organising people, but it's one of those periods when of internal disorganisation, I suppose you have to say, more disorganised than it's probably ever been, which I don't think he wouldn't be playing a role in organising it back together, if that's what you're asking, because that wasn't really one of his fortes.
Who do you think he would be supporting these days, if anyone?
Probably no one. I can't see anyone that would appeal to him, to be honest with you.
Fair enough. Okay, I got another few questions here. Yeah. Okay. One of my good friends has asked, would Jonathan Bowden or yourself have any sympathy for the optimism that saw loads of people in America run to Trump in 2016?
I personally supported Trump.
Do you think Jonathan Bowden would have?
Yes, I think he would. Yeah, he was a realist, actually. Let's say he also supported the movements of the new right in Europe, the moderate populist groups. He was a strong supporter of those and that approach. And Trump is sort of an American version of that. So I'm sure he would have seen in Trump a leader who did as best as he could. He was interested in other, God, what's the name of that guy? Is it Huey Long or someone from Louisiana? Was that his name, the guy? He was interested in people like that as well from in American history. And Trump, in a way, is a modern version of those, a more successful modern version of those. I would say he would. Jonathan also liked the powerful individual. He was in a sort of Thomas Carlyle way of seeing history through the lens of individuals rather than movements of people and things like that, and great men affecting events. And Trump is very much like that, because he's effectively a lone wolf who single-handedly kidnapped the Republican Party against its own will. And I think Jonathan would have respected that, actually.
Yeah, that makes sense. The next question you've already answered, because basically you said that he probably wouldn't have supported anyone, particularly at the moment. The next question from the same very good friend of mine was that basically, where do you think like the right-wing nationalist movement can go today?
In Britain?
Yeah.
Well, the the diagnosis, which he accepted completely back in the 90s when I first knew him and used to speak at very great length with him and a couple other people, maybe over dinner or when we used to go on car journeys up and down the country on the telephone, so forth. Was by, he was also quite interested in the English aspect and promoting Englishness. And a lot of his speeches, if you listen, he said English a lot. He refers to England and Englishness a lot because he recognized that Englishness was a trait that the British establishment hated and despised, which they don't hate and despise Scottishness or Welshness or Irishness.
Fair enough.
They hate Englishness and the display of the George Cross flag.
Yep.
Because it has a more visceral atavistic trend to it than Scottishness or Welshness. They can be patronizing about Welshness and Scottishness, but Englishness, if it comes to the fore, is potentially a much more aggressive form of local identity. And that's why the British ruling class don't like Englishness, and Jonathan recognized that, for example.
Sure.
So he favored a promotion of English identity in a populist way and merging the traditional right-wing Tory type populism with working class nationalism, not based on fascism or Nazism, in a sort of British way, in a new right way. The new right in France wanted to develop a French road to nationalism, essentially. And that's what he saw in he used to have a British road to nationalism, merging. British. That's why the book we do is called "British Route to the New Right." That's what he favoured, and would have, if he was around now, that's what he'd be trying to develop and foster.
But I presume not to the exclusion of also British nationalism around that.
What do you understand by the term British nationalism?
Well, keeping the UK together as England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland.
Yes, well, promoting, I think Jonathan also recognised that the way to keep Britain together isn't necessarily by suppressing regional nationalism, but by having all the parts of Britain promoting local nationalism, but within a sort of federal framework. There's no necessary contradiction in that. If you go to Germany, Bavarian or nationalism is quite strong. Okay, I'm not going to use Germany as an example because there is a sort of have been breakaway parts of Bavaria. I'll go Crete. Crete in Greece, Cretan local identity is very strong.
Yeah, I've been there.
Yeah, very strong, but they don't. It's not at the expense at all of their Greek identity, is it?
No, absolutely not.
So that's the best example I can probably come up with.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you, and I'm presuming you would say that that's the kind of thing that Jonathan Bowden would support.
Yes, yeah. He recognised that English nationalism was a strong strand within, and England's by far the biggest part of Great Britain.
Yeah, of course it is.
And unless you win England, you're not going to win anything. And within England, there's the suppressed English nationalism is a very strong emotive pull within the white working class, particularly.
Yes.
And he recognised that.
Cool. I've got a couple more questions to ask you, mate, if that's okay. Where are we? That one I've already asked. Here we go. Lady Charlotte, who's in the chat and who is a good friend of mine and who is the mother of 3 children. She's doing the best that she can to protect from all this nonsense going on with the China virus. She asks, what do you think Bowden would make of patriotic alternative?
In my opinion, he wouldn't have anything to do with it. He didn't have much of an opinion of Mark Collett, but Mark Collett has somewhat undergone a personality change to a degree since then. I don't think he'd own it because it's far too overtly, for want of a better word, Nazi in their ideological routing. They underpin themselves in Nazi ideology. Bowden would occasionally make a rhetorical flourish in that direction to get a cheer from the back of the audience, but Jonathan Bowden's position really was that the only way forward was through a European populist approach, such as we see now with the in France or Rassemblement National, the Liga in Italy.
Yeah. All of these people eschew any kind of link to mid-20th century European people. They have nothing to do with it, or as Jonathan Bowden said, they step over it.
Yeah, that's one of his favourite terms actually. But it's stating the bleeding obvious, really, that you can't have a party that roots itself in that direction and expect to get anywhere, except in trouble with the authorities and ruin people's lives. That should be, to say that or tell anyone that is ridiculous.
Yeah.
But in this country, you do, which is one of the things. Look, British nationalism is one thing that Jonathan had a slightly sardonic sense of humour.
Mm-hmm.
And he didn't suffer fools gladly, sort of thing. So he would have a dim view of people who were politically stupid, and that sort of politics is politically stupid and self-evidently self-defeating and pointless. It can't ever appeal to the mainstream of British society or any society in any country anywhere actually. And British nationalism, one of his main gripes with British nationalism, which is why he started off in the Tory party and the fringes of the Tory party, is because British nationalism has always been a bit anti-intellectual and a bit thick and a bit stupid in how it's gone about things, a bit blunder-headed in its approach by being too a blunt instrument.
Yeah, I don't disagree with anything you say there, mate. That's kind of what my channel is about.
Well, he was very scornful of that, and in private, sort of sneering of it. I'm not so correctly, frankly, because it's our future and survival as a people at stake. And if you're going around like a bunch of blundering idiots, you're not helping anyone. You're actually self-destructive. And he was very realistic about that sort of thing. Yeah,
I totally agree. I'm going to go back to this same chap's next two questions. Where are we? Sorry, actually, I'm on Lady of Shallott's questions. I do beg your pardon. Where are we? Lady of Shalott is also asking, what do you think that Jonathan Bowden would have made of the lockdowns and the forced vax stuff that's going on at the moment?
I don't know. The people who I know who are closest to him in the circle that used to spend most time together are less into that issue than in right-wing circles, nationalistic right-wing circles, the anti-vax viewpoint is much more popular than it is amongst the population at large, put it that way.
Yes.
British population. In my estimation, something like 95% of the indigenous population go along with the establishment narrative on it. Now, taking a strong anti-establishment position on that isn't going to endear you with that population. You're actually aligning yourselves more with the mainstream position amongst Muslims and people of an Afro-Caribbean background. They're the groups that are most sceptical on these issues. I think he'd probably be realistic enough to realise that, and also he wasn't really a conspiratorialist, and a lot of those theories are frankly based on big conspiracy type explanations for why this is happening. And although I'm a skeptic on a lot of the things that are going on, and I don't doubt that the establishment and pharmaceutical companies and all sorts of other bodies are making the most out of this situation, a lot of slightly flaky views are being expressed on the subject, and I think he'd probably be realistic enough to realise that. Certainly the small group of people that we used to associate together, everyone else I know in that group are less excitable on the issue, put it that way, than most people on the right of the political spectrum.
Well, I'm going to have to disagree with you a little bit there, because like I'm not vaxxed, and the only way I'll get vaxxed is if 7 or 8 people hold me down. But yeah, I mean, you know, I'm asking your opinion on stuff, and you know, my opinion is different on that subject. But the other thing that a couple of people have asked me is,
well, he must have undergone. I suspect he underwent a lot of medication before he died. Put it that way.
Yeah, I'm sure he did. He didn't strike me as the most healthy lifestyle person that you would meet.
Yeah, I don't think he ate well. Put it that way. I don't think. Yeah, he lived. I don't think he was particularly healthy.
Yeah, I mean, as I say, I think he was a great man in some respects, but you know, not all respects, because no one is. You know, we're
a slightly odd shape as well. I used to. This is a bit of a personal thing to say, but we used to room together, and when we used to go places, we often used to go in a B&B and share a room together. Separate beds, of course, separate bed. But yeah, but he had a weird shape to him. He did have a weird shape to him. Yeah, he had a weird shape to him.
Yeah, no, for sure. Someone asked earlier, did Jonathan Bowden ever have a girlfriend of any description that you knew?
Well, this is one of the things. He was a bit of a Walter Mitty, as I was saying to you earlier. He made a ridiculous claim that he had a girlfriend. He used to describe her as from a rough working class council estate with tattoos, who he had like multiple kids with. There was a fiction, but he used to tell them this.
Sure.
But I know of 2 women in particular that he had a real passion for. The first one, I won't say the name. The first one, the circumstance that I sussed it out was a meeting. I think it was after the would have been 2004 European election. I think it was, and at Griffin's place in Wales, and he put up like a gazebo in the garden, and about 20 of us had to cram into this gazebo in little chairs. Well, each person, well, not each person, but several people gave a little talk about what we were going to do in the next year, or 2 years ahead. And I had to give a talk on something or another. And as each person, because it was so crowded, as each person got up to talk, someone else would take the seat of the person who was giving their little half-hour briefing on whatever the subject they were giving a briefing on. And so I got up to give my briefing on whatever I was going to talk about, and then I go and sit down and it wasn't the same seat I was originally sitting in. It was a seat that the previous person had got up from, and it was next to this particular woman, which I love by sort of happenstance. So I go to squeeze around to get in there, and Jonathan literally climbed over about 5 chairs, pushing people out of the way, and plonked himself down in this chair. I thought, what the bloody hell have you done that for? It's a bit weird behaviour. And so I then went to his chair. I'd then climb over different chairs to get to his chair. Thinking, what's he done that for? Anyway, so then in the interval, I can't remember if I smoked at the time or not, but I think I did. But he went rushing out to have a fag with this particular woman out in the outside area, outside during an fag break. And I thought, what's going on? That's a bit suspicious. What is he doing here? And because he went to speak at meetings all around the country, he'd meet different people, and he obviously met them at one meeting with speakers. And on the way back from another meeting, I was in the car, and I made some sort of ribald remark about her. And he said, "Oh, don't you dare speak about her in this way." But on a few times we had any cross words, and he said, "Don't you dare speak about her in this common manner. She's the most darling person." Oh, Christ Almighty! And he did. He had a total passion for her, which I then found out. And he's going to see her all the time. And, actually painted he was a bit of an artist, wasn't he, as well? Mm-hmm. And he painted a picture of her, which I'm assured was from imagination, because it was in the nude of a very strange picture.
Maybe it wasn't. Maybe it wasn't.
I don't know. It's not for me to say, is it? But it was. I've seen the picture, and but he had a total passion for. They fell out over something, and then he transferred his attention to another woman who I know about, and like the first one, although that they both very much respected and almost were in awe of him because of his intellect and so forth, and his personality. They were both platonic, but not through his choice, as I was sort of told. And this one, he tried to sort of bite like a dog, like a Rottweiler, fixing his teeth on her. But it didn't. So he wasn't like he was gay or anything like that. That's what the question is. He definitely had intentions, put it that way, and fell in love with these particular two for sure.
Okay, I've been asked to show you a picture, Eddie, and see if you recognise it. So I'll do that.
It's not that painting, is it?
It's a drawing, actually, but yeah, okay. Well, 1 second. I think it's this one, isn't it? It is. Right, okay. How do I do this? Go there. This is where my boomer tech gets really bad. Yeah. That's great. Window. Okay. Probably go from there. Forgive me, chap. I am really boom attack. I honestly am. Why is that not showing up? Okay, should show up. Okay, I don't know how to do this. What? Hang on a minute. It's a cute drawing of a dark-haired girl, and she is actually rather pretty.
Is it a good picture? I'm not a fan of his art, to be honest with you.
I don't think this is his. I'm not sure if this is his. It might be, but it's got kind of writing below her chin over it.
Right.
But it's what I would consider an attractive woman. Put it that way. Hang on, someone's given. Open the web page and share it. It's from a book. Okay, let's do it this way. What this chap doesn't realize is that I'm on 2 different browsers. But anyway, I'll find it in due course. Here we go. So in order to get that, I know I'm going to do it, I think. Copy. I beg your pardon, guys. I know there's a lot of dead air at the moment, but I'm on 2 different browsers because I have to be, because the main browser I use doesn't work very well on this channel, sadly. There we go. This should work. There we go. So if I now do share screen, there we go. Ooh, done. Got it. There you go. Do you recognize that one, Mr. Butler?
Nope. No idea what that is.
I'm told by the person who sent it to me that that's I've used it, Richard Ford.
What is it? Is it a picture that he's amended?
I have no idea. It was sent to me by my friend Richard Ford.
Mm-hmm.
So, and Richard Ford has a whole channel devoted to Jonathan Bowden. So
okay.
Hang on, I'm gonna see what he's saying. It's the same. That's from his art book. That's from Jonathan Bowden's art book, apparently.
Okay. Well, is it an archetype that he liked the look of? Is that what it's?
I have no idea. I think I was asked to ask you if you recognized it. That was the main thing.
No.
There we go. I asked him, Richard Ford. Okay, we've got a couple more questions. Where are we? Yeah.
Jonathan also he had a thing called the Spinning Top Club. Have you heard of that?
No, I haven't.
There was a in the 2000s. He was in. He probably set it up pretty much himself, or with a couple of collaborators. A thing called the Spinning Top Club, which is a sort of meta-political cultural circle that used to meet in a pub in maybe somewhere like Camden.
Mm-hmm.
And there'd be I only went to 1 or perhaps 2 meetings. He didn't encourage me to go because he knew I would scorn him for all this sort of arty-farty carry on, where they're talking in sort of airy-fairy and practical ways about things. And he saw me as someone who was only interested in the nitty-gritty practicalities of winning elections and the real world, if you like. And so he was always a bit shamefaced to even mention it to me, and he never would want me to go because he thought I'd go there and see all these lank-haired sissies, for want of a better word, talking a lot of old nonsense. But he would. I think he did get, for some reason I did go once, and they were just like that. But he was a bit sort of, he didn't want to mix the 2 worlds, you know. This where they'd sit there and read poetry or something, you know, and I'd be sort of going like that. And he knew I'd be sitting there thinking, I want to shoot them all or something, and they'd be all talking about some poem, and yeah. But he did. in another world, that's probably what you would have preferred to have done. Probably just sit there talking about stuff like that.
Yeah, he had an artistic temperament. I don't think we can argue about that at all. Okay, another question someone's asked me is, where do you think, or what do you think, the direction that British nationalism should take today? What do you think that is?
Well, as I probably alluded to that before, the only way forward is through a populist approach, like the successful European parties are doing, like the Lega, the Rassemblement National, the Austrian Freedom Party, the new parties at Vox in Spain, the Vlaams Swedish Democrats, the Finns Party. They're all got the same approach. They're all doing the Alternative for Deutschland. They're all doing reasonably well, or certainly a lot better than us. They've all got decent parties. They've got parliamentary representation. They're forces to be reckoned with, and that is the only way forward. We have to find a way of doing that in this country. As I am in a party still called For Britain, which is actually in the British chapter of that group, the European group that they formed in the European Parliament. Although we're not in the European Union anymore, as we're in the continent of Europe, we're allowed to be part of this group, because the European Union still aspires for all of Europe to be part of the European Union. So they allow non-EU countries to have political representation within these European-wide parties. So that's why For Britain is still part of it. You may argue that For Britain aren't very successful, but whether it's successful or not, that is the correct approach. And anything else than that approach is just ridiculous and futile.
A friend of mine asked, like kind of related to what you've been talking about there, the For Britain is, well, in his opinion, it's fairly a libertine party, if you know what I mean. It's not like very Christian and that kind of stuff.
Maybe not very Christian. It's not anti-Christian for sure.
Yeah, no, I as I said, this is not my question. This is a friend of mine's question. But yeah, I get where he's coming from. He's kind of saying that.
Well, Britain isn't a very Christian. It's not exactly it's not like Italy or Spain, where Christianity or Catholicism has got a much stronger hold, or Greece for that matter. Or even parts of Germany or France. We're a bit of a atheistic country. People don't take religion very seriously in this country, so a heavily religious party wouldn't really, I suspect, get anywhere. Jonathan, if he was anything, used to go around with, in his later years, used to go around with this sort of pagan necklace thing on, so he wasn't exactly Christian either.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. And I watched actually, no, I didn't watch. I read an article on the Affirmative Right website, which is Colin Liddell's website, which often has good articles, where a guy said exactly that like trying to impose Christianity on modern Britain is making things harder than they need to be. And I kind of agree with that.
Well, you're putting an extra layer of one of the things is that Jonathan also agreed on. I used to discuss these things in an ordinate length with Jonathan, to the finest detail of it. And one of the things is that to get anywhere, you have to be, it's called minimalism, where you drop all surplus baggage. You get rid of all the Gramsci, most of this in a communist sense in Italy. You drop all superfluous baggage and you focus on the core thing that you've got to achieve. It's also effectively what populism is. So adding this layer of Christianity around it is actually the exact opposite of what we've got to do.
Yeah, no, I do kind of agree. I know many of my friends don't, but I mean, I'm very...
You've got to be able to drop your own personal hang-ups. You know, there's lots of things if I could wave a magic wand and do exactly what I want, it wouldn't necessarily be what I would politically or publicly advocate, because I know I'm not going to be able to do those things. I want to get my core issues accepted. The other things can wait, or I can sacrifice for the greater good. You know, you've got to be able to put something behind you and just realise what's real in this world.
Yeah, no,
Jonathan agreed with all this sort of thing. He had slightly contempt for people. Jonathan wasn't someone who was unknown to feeling contempt for people, which is probably one of the reasons why I got on so well with him. He totally understood this. He totally understood this.
Yeah, no, I think you're entirely right. But like I said, and I would say quite a lot of my friends wouldn't agree. And I think probably the majority of the people on the right who I actually like these days, which is not the likes of Mark Collette, but is the likes of other people.
Strangely enough, Mark Collette used to agree with all this as well.
He seems to have flown around a lot over the years.
Yeah. Well, there's money in putting up a big show. People would talking hard. People donate more. So that's the simple explanation for it.
I'll be honest. The thing that really turned me off Mark Collette was when he was asked his 3 greatest books with all the great authors that are British, and he came out with 2 Americans and an Austrian. So, you know.
What were the Americans? Was it Dave Duke or something, I presume?
Yeah, David Duke was one, and I think the other one was the dude who used to run the American Nazi Pie.
George Lincoln Rockwell.
That's right,
It's not going to be Mark Twain, is it?
No, George Lincoln Rockwell. And then the other one was
George Lincoln Rockwell, was it the Dave Duke and Adolf Hitler?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like, imagine being an Englishman with all our great tradition, or Britain rather, of all our great tradition of literature, and you can't come out with one British author.
Well, you know, if you want to name 3 books to win friends and influence people, they're not going to be those 3, are they? You know.
My own opinion is that Mark Collette is very dodgy. Let's say it that way. That's about why I'd say this.
Well, he's a shock jock. He's essentially a shock. I don't want to turn this into a Mark Collette show, but he's essentially a shock jock who's there to. It solicits donations, doesn't it? Because it gets people in these little young people who don't know anything of the world, who sit anonymously in their back bedrooms. It gets them a bit excited in the same way that doing a shoot 'em up game on their PlayStation gets them excited. It's the same sort of crowd that he deals with in these solitary types, and it's not politics. And Jonathan, I'm certain, would have scorned that. He didn't. Look, Mark Collette is a different person. I actually used to be very close friends with Mark Collette back in those days, and Jonathan was a bit scornful of the fact that I was close friends with Mark Collette, which I did used to be very close friends with him. And Jonathan sort of looked down his nose at him. They didn't get on at all. They didn't really know each other really, but they didn't get on really at all. I
just think that if you'd have asked Jonathan Bowden for like his top 3 authors, I think they probably would have been British.
Well, they wouldn't have been Dave Duke, George Lincoln Rockwell, and Adolf Hitler, that's for sure. You know, they wouldn't be in the top 100 either. It wouldn't have even crossed his mind to. I'm sure he never read Dave Duke's book. Was probably on My Awakening, is it? I don't know what the book is. I think it's called My Awakening.
I've never read it, mate. I've no interest.
I've never read it, and I'm pretty certain Jonathan wouldn't have bothered. And I don't know which one of the George Lincoln Rockwell's books, probably White Power or something. But I would pretty much guess Jonathan wouldn't have bothered reading that. He may have looked at Mein Kampf because it's a sort of it is an important book in the history of the world actually, but let alone the West. And
I've got someone I know in the chat who is asking what you think of Bowden's book called Right. If you've read it, I don't even know this book.
No, I haven't read it. I presume it's actually a collection of his early articles, is it? I don't know.
The guy in the chat who asked me, Jobu, tell us what it is, and maybe we'll be able to answer it. Apparently, according to friends in the chat, Jonathan Bowden did mention Duke in an essay on countercurrents.
But he may well have done. The countercurrents, Duke countercurrents, I think, was mostly written in the up to the early 90s. I think, if I'm right in saying.
Yeah.
Because it's mentioned in the foreword to this book, which I think was actually part of that. Dave Duke, when he got elected to the Louisiana. It was Louisiana Senate or House of Representatives.
Yeah.
Not the National House of Representatives, in the local state one in Louisiana in the late 80s. And he got there. He had been in the Ku Klux Klan and he had been in the American Nazi Party. But he sort of turned over a moderate leaf and stood on a populist platform and actually got elected as an ex-reformed Klansman onto the Louisiana state legislature in the late 80s, and made a bit of a name for himself in that role, and stood for governor, and wasn't slaughtered in the election. It was a relatively close election, but when he failed to become state governor, he then went back to being a sort of whether it was officially the Klan, but he effectively went back to his previous political position. So his populist phase was rather nakedly a act, and when he was politically successful and he got elected to the state legislature and nearly become governor, it wasn't, the percentage wasn't huge. I forget what it was, but it wasn't a huge loss. When he did lose, instead of persevering, he went, "Oh, sod this," and he went back to being a sort of far-right loony again. And so I don't know what Jonathan was referring to. He's possibly referring, when he mentioned Dave Duke, it's possibly because he wrote that countercurrent thing relatively early in his career, and he's probably referring to Duke, the earlier Duke, rather than later Duke.
Fair enough.
I suspect I might be wrong.
Yeah, no, fair enough. I've got a couple of personal questions to ask you, which are, firstly, do you have any of Eddy Butler? Do you have any of Jonathan Bowden's art?
No.
And the second one was, do you have or know of, apart from the stuff you told us about that film that you were making, any unpublished Jonathan Bowden recordings of him doing speeches and stuff like that?
I've got pictures of him and stuff at meetings and stuff like that. But
okay, as I said, these were questions that people were asking me in the chat.
The guy who would have the film footage is a guy called Rod Gordon, who made the other two films. But
cool.
Seen him for years, and he did used to keep all the little tapes that the raw footage, so he may well have it.
Oh well, that's the guy Richard needs to get in touch with if he wants to find some more Jonathan Bowden film. Then I will, by the way, Mr. Butler, send you the link for that Trafalgar Day thing after the stream, which is on my mate's channel, so that's cool. I think we've covered a lot of stuff. I mean, is there any final things that you observations you'd like to make about Jonathan Bowden and his contribution to right-wing stuff?
His main contribution was that he added weight to it because he did have an intellectual he provides more intellectualism to the movement than there was from anyone else, and that probably encouraged other people to join and so forth. That was his main role when he was alive. After his death, I think a lot of his the recorded work that he did that people sort of feed off now give a slightly incorrect view of how he was, and it's probably feeding a more hardline, an unrealistically hardline approach from people, actually, which isn't actually what he believed.
Yeah, I mean, look, if you actually watch the interviews of Jonathan Bowden when he was alive, he's certainly no sort of Nazi larper, not even slightly.
No. He occasionally made nods. If you listen to his speeches, he occasionally did make a nod in that direction.
Sure.
He did. But I know exactly why he did it, and it was to get acceptance from the crowd and applause.
Yeah. Okay.
Which is, it's not a very flattering thing, but that's what he did.
Well, it's a human thing, I suppose. We all want like people to like us, I suppose.
Yes.
And that was obviously
Jonathan was a performer, as you were saying earlier. He was primarily a performer. He was a presence and a performer. That was his primary, and an art, and in that sense, an artist, rather than a political calculator or a calculating machine. He wasn't a political calculating machine. He was a performer, and a performer needs an appreciative audience. That's what they feed.
Yeah, for sure.
That's really what he was. In some respects, that's what he was.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I mean, obviously you knew him, and I never did. But I mean, like as I said, I've done like a pretty intensive last 3-4 weeks of watching nearly everything there is about Jonathan Bowden online and all of his speeches, etc., that I can find. And that was certainly the impression I got by the end of it. I mean, a very impressive man in some respects, and a genius in terms of oratory.
He was, yeah. His rhetorical skill was immense. Was immense, which is why I was annoyed with him when he didn't he didn't use it in the way that I wanted it. The way I wanted him to.
Mm-hmm.
He was. It did used to annoy me, but it sort of amused me and annoyed me at the same time, because I knew really what would happen when he turned up.
Fair enough. Could I ask you, this is not about Jonathan Bowden, this is about current stuff. My thinking at the moment is that all of the right of centre, in inverted commas, populist nationalist parties need to have at least some sort of loose alliance so they don't run against each other at every bloody by-election, because they're mostly chasing the same votes. What's your feeling about that?
Well, they are all obviously chasing the same votes, and the talent pool is also split amongst all these groups, so they can't. You haven't got a pool of talent in one group to have good regional organisers, good branch organisers, a good pool of branch organisers spread across the country, because they're all in penny packets.
Yep.
But the in my opinion, hoping that they all come together in some sort of alliance, like or something massing together.
Let me explain. I don't mean like a firm kind of alliance where you're all tied together. I just mean a loose election
an informal alliance, as you say, not to run against each other. They're competitors, so they see each other as enemies, actually. So that's what mitigates against alliances. I believe that Britain are to alliance with a number of other like-minded groups, which would be positive and might conceivably be the first stages in a formal unity, potentially. But there's people who've got vested interests also in these different groups, which tend to outweigh the likelihood of people submerging their own identity into a bigger group who's going to be in charge. If people have financial stake in it, they work for it, they get income from it, all these sorts of things mitigate against unity. And it's rare, it's very rare. When the only time really when there's been groups merging together, I can think of two occasions. One was the formation of the National Front in 1967. And the other, in a much smaller degree, was the formation of the BNP in, I think, 1982 or something, 1981, 1982. So in a much smaller level than the formation of the NF in 67. And so it's very rare for it to happen. And usually, the success of the BNP in Britain, but in the 90s and 2000s, wasn't caused by an alliance with anyone. It was caused by it being more successful and people gravitating to it as it had political success. And that's how UKIP grew as well, actually. So it's not normally that's how things work out. One group becomes more successful by sort of survival of the fittest. One group becomes more successful and people adhere to it. But if they're too fragmented, sometimes it can be difficult to any group to get any sort of traction at all. And we, unfortunately, in a position at the moment where no group's getting any sort of traction. And so no one's adhering to, there's no motive for anyone to adhere more to one group than another.
Colin Liddell in the chat, who runs the Affirmative Right website, which if you don't know, Mr. Butler, is well worth having a look at. He's saying micro-nationalism in a crab bucket, which is kind of what it looks like at the moment in the UK, to me anyway. It's like, you know, they're all pulling each other down, so no one gets up. And it's not like the Conservatives are in any way, shape or form actually any sort of right-wing party anymore, sadly. They're just not.
But the Conservatives haven't got any sort of, you know, they haven't, since really the demise of the Rundle Club in the early 90s, there hasn't been an organised right-wing element to the Conservative Party at all. So you can forget about them. But there has been extra Conservative Party groups such as UKIP or the Brexit Party or perhaps the Referendum Party in the late 90s. And but the other problem is these groups like Reform, isn't it? And I think Fox's group seems to have disappeared, but I can't remember what they were called.
In London, I remember.
But they have bars on people from, for example, who are ex-BNP from joining them, but they're very paranoid about people who have got connections to things like BNP. So that also fragments things because they're so scared of being associated with people who had been involved in anything more hard line in the past. And and to that extent, they allow the establishment to set their agenda for them. And they limit themselves in that way.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. UKIP used to do that, as you said. I mean, I kind of agree with Colin Liddell in the chat, who's saying if you split the nationalists into pro-Nazi and anti-Nazi, that might make sense. But at the same time, if you've got parties who are saying, like, if you were in the BNP, as Mr. Butler was, and as Jonathan Bowden was, he wouldn't be allowed to join some of those anti-Nazi parties. So, you know, you got to sort that out.
You don't necessarily have to be anti-Nazi, you just have to be non-Nazi.
Yeah, agreed.
But yeah, well, anyone who thinks that you can come out with Nazi stuff and get anywhere has got to be slightly mad. So it's not really, we're limiting ourselves by not having people who spout Nazism, for want of a better word. We're cutting off people. We're actually cutting off people who are self-evidently nutcases, because you know, even I would say, even if you believed all that, and that was your primary motivating thing in your life, you'd surely have the common sense to know that you can't say it in public and keep it as your own little private secret, dirty little secret type thing. But you know, they don't.
Oh, look, I mean, my grandfather's brother was blown up by the Afrika Korps in North Africa. He was in the Royal Artillery and he was killed by German counter battery fire. And my grandfather's house in central London was blown flat by the Luftwaffe in 1940. Luckily, no one was killed because all the kids and everyone were in an air raid shower. But it's impossible to argue to people in the UK that, you know, the Nazis were somehow good guys. It's never going to fucking work. It just isn't. Excuse my language.
I don't necessarily think due to that, but they've just got a whole host of troublesome matters associated with them that it just makes it an obvious non-starter. You know, it's worth. You know, you said someone else wanted to reinvigorate the Christian religion in Britain as a precursor to us getting anywhere or something like that. Well, how much more of a problem is it in trying to rehabilitate the Nazi regime?
Which wasn't particularly pro-Christian anyway. So,
yes.
I don't disagree at all. We're just adding layer on layer of difficulties. And finally, I would say the thing that nationalists don't talk about enough is that we need to get indigenous Anglo-Celtic birth rates in Britain up above 2.1%, because, you know. Well,
again, that's something we're not going to be able to do until you're in power. You can't do that unless you're in power and you hold the reins of power. So I would argue that's something it's barely worth discussing until you're in power. It's a sort of wish list thing, but you're not going to.
But it is important. I mean, like, merely stopping mass immigration, if you don't get the indigenous birth rate up, won't do you any good. I mean, it will help, but not much.
Yeah, well, one of the basic things, again, which Jonathan would have totally agreed with, is talking about, you get people say, if you stop further immigration, then it doesn't solve the problem because birth rates, there's different birth rates of people in the country. When you've got 500,000-ish coming in every year, if you can't stop that 500,000, we're going to cease to exist very quickly. And if you can't even persuade our people to shut the door on that, or even slow the door, so it's only 100,000, talking about anything else is all actually superfluous. So until you've done that first thing, all the rest is actually superfluous. So you need to focus on doing. You've got to do first things first, haven't you?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I don't disagree with that at all. Is there anything you would like to shill, Mr. Butler, in terms of like YouTube channels or anything like that?
Not really. But I wouldn't mind saying that if you could.
I will email that to you. I'll do it straight after the stream.
England expects. I haven't seen it for about years and years and years.
Yeah, no, I'll absolutely email that to you straight after the stream. Thank you very, very much for coming on. Like, honestly, it's been such a fascinating discussion about like a really big figure in national history. nationalist history. And I'd love to have you on again one day if you're free. I have noted, by the way, that one of your interests is the Jack the Ripper murders and stuff like that. And I've actually got a very small connection with that, because there's an encyclopedia about Jack the Ripper, which includes a reference to me because I told them about British Army bayonets in 1888. So anyway,
But was a total murder, is that?
yeah, they changed the bayonet in 1888 so that.
So it was a different shaped wound, was it?
Yeah, absolutely. It was. They changed it from like a triangular bayonet to a knife bayonet in 1888.
Yeah, they do.
Yeah, they went over from.
How quickly did they issue the new bayonet to everybody?
Pretty quickly, because they went. Yeah, because they changed from the Martini Henry rifle to the Lee Metford, and the Lee Metford couldn't take the old bayonet. So
But what about the volunteer units? They probably get the old rifles.
Absolutely. The militia guys would still have had the Martini Henry and the triangular bayonet for sure. Yeah, that's true. But I do know a little bit. I do know a little about the canonical 5 murders and all this kind of stuff. So yeah, I'll talk to you about that sometime. We're going to go out on a what I hope is a up, which is another little speech from Jonathan Bowden, a short one, where he says, as we will see just now, this.
The other thing about Jonathan, he didn't do great big long 3-hour speeches where everyone was going. They were usually just the right length as well.
Yeah, just about an hour. Yeah. To
keep people's attention without, some people went on and on and on, but Johnson did just the right amount of time.
Yeah, he was absolutely, as you say, the showman, and
he could judge things. He was very good at judging that sort of thing. Very good.
Yep, I totally agree. Here we go. Anyway, this is going to just close us out.
All people who have a vanguard and elitist mentality are regarded as partly mad by their own groups, because the majority of people do not want to know. The majority of people wish to live their own life in their own way, and they only look at these broader questions when life impinges upon them and comes upon them, and the hand of life grasps them by the collar, and they really cannot do any other thing but notice what is in front of them. They would love many of the problems of contemporary Britain, many which revolve around the processes of immigration, to be solved. But they would love to have nothing to do with it themselves, and they would love somebody came forward magically without trouble and without fuss to deal with it on their behalf. They want no unpleasantness, and they want no nastiness, particularly in their own name. But at the same time, if somebody does things of any sort that could be ascribed to that, they would run away and hide initially, be privately pleased, condemn the people who did it, support the people who were against them, and yet at the same time have a secret smirk and smile on their face about the whole thing, and they would do all of that simultaneously. And that's what people are like, and that's what our own people are like up to a point, and that's the funk and the state of internal confusion and bemusement that our people are in. Because every time they turn on the box in the corner, it says everything is marvellous and is all for the best, and that there is no need to worry, and that we're all sleepwalking towards victory. Just because most of the politics of this era seems to be running well and truly against us does not mean that the situation is hopeless, because situations are never hopeless. Groups that have been done down or perceive that they've been done down by history have undergone worse traumas than we are undergoing at the present time. The danger of the ideology of the victim, which I don't really subscribe to, except as a tactic on occasion, is that you begin to think like a victim and you begin to act like a victim. Many of our people now are almost asking for a whipping. asking for a collective beating, asking to be forgiven for the past, asking to be forgiven for sins and crimes of the past, which they never committed, which they're hardly aware of, which could be reconstrued as episodes of heroic cruelty or glorious vandalism that don't even need to be apologised for in the past or in the present.
Okay, guys, so there you go. From Jonathan Bowden's own mouth, situations are never hopeless. Don't give up. Thank you once again to Mr. Eddy Butler. It's been a great honor to have you on my stream. And I'm sure loads of people have learned stuff today. And I'd really like to have you back on at some stage if you'd be willing to come.
Yep, we wish.
Thank you very much. And as I said, when we get off the stream, I'll send you that link.
Okay.
Good night. Good night, ladies and gents. Happy Christmas and a Merry New Year. And one bit of shilling, there is a special stream of the founders of my channel, which is to say Sojo and Adaman and myself, which I'm going to release on Boxing Day, which is about an hour and a half. So, and then we'll be back in the new year after that. So go well, folks, and good night. Happy Christmas, Merry New Year, and a great New Year.
Okay. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.